Some men carry their past like a shadow. For Sheriff Elias Thorne, it was a debt paid in silence, a bargain with the devil to keep his family safe. But what happens when the price of peace is a man's soul, and the final payment puts everything he loves in deadly danger? Dust settled on the bones of a dead town, and the only sound was the wind, whistling a mournful tune through the saloon's broken window. Sheriff Elias Thorne, a man made of sun-baked leather and silence, watched it from the porch of his office. The badge pinned to his chest was less a symbol of justice, and more a mark of the deals he'd made, the lines he'd blurred, and the peace he'd purchased with the coin of moral compromise. He wasn't a bad man. He was a broken man who had once been forced to do bad things. He'd come to a quiet town with his wife Clara and their daughter Ilara, hoping to outrun the ghosts of his past. His wife Clara was the town's only solace. A woman with a quiet strength that felt like rain after a long drought. She ran the general store. Her hands were always busy, mending clothes or measuring flour, or tracing the worn edges of a photograph kept tucked in her apron. The photo was of a young boy, their son, a child they'd lost years ago to a sickness that swept through the plains like a brush fire. The grief had hardened Elias and made Clara softer, more resilient. He had sought control, a way to prevent another loss, and she had sought solace in the simple acts of tending and caring. Ilara was a reflection of them both, with her father's solemn eyes and her mother's stubborn kindness. She'd inherited her mother's grace and her father's quiet observation, spending her days sketching the desert landscape and the people who passed through, capturing the truth of their weary souls on paper. She knew her father had secrets, a weight he carried in his stooped shoulders and the way his eyes would go distant. She saw the way the townspeople looked at him, a mix of grudging respect and quiet fear. The town, Redemption's Hollow, was a sanctuary of sorts, a place where folks came to get lost or forgotten. But even in a place like this, peace was fragile. The fragile balance was maintained by the unspoken agreement that Elias would look the other way, and the town's patrons would maintain a semblance of order. His corruption was an open secret, a necessary evil that kept the peace. The town was controlled by a man named Silas, a gaunt, wiry man with a face like a hawk and a predatory smile. He owned the saloon, the land around the mines, and half the town's businesses. Elias had been a sheriff on his payroll, a puppet with a badge, ensuring that Silas's operations went unchallenged. Elias had justified it to himself for years. He'd told himself that Silas was better than the alternatives, that his brand of law was the kind that kept the real outlaws at bay. But a man can only live with a lie for so long before it begins to corrode him from the inside out. He had a family to protect. A family that deserved a better man. The catalyst for change came on a windless afternoon, the kind of day where the heat pressed down on everything like a curse. A stranger rode into town, a young woman named Leona, her face etched with a fear that went deeper than the dust on her cheeks. She was looking for her brother, a miner who had vanished a month prior. Elias's stomach twisted. He knew what happened to miners who went missing. They were swallowed by the earth, their bodies lost in the tunnels Silas's men were digging. He knew Silas was pushing his men too hard, collapsing tunnels to cover up the evidence of his operations. He had always looked the other way. Leona's eyes, a shocking, vibrant blue against her exhaustion, met his. "I know you're the law here," she said, her voice a reedy thing, barely above a whisper. "Please. He's all I have left." Her words were a mirror, reflecting his own grief, his own fear of losing what he held most dear. He saw his own daughter in her, the fierce desperation of someone with nothing left to lose. He saw his wife in her, the quiet plea for a small measure of justice. The old Elias, the corrupt one, would have told her to leave, to forget about her brother. He would have told her that some things were better left buried. But he saw the photograph tucked in her hand, a simple, faded image of a boy and a girl standing together, their faces full of a life that was now gone. The image was a gut punch, a brutal reminder of the son he'd lost, a loss he had never properly grieved. He saw the truth in that photograph, the simple, devastating truth of what it meant to lose family. He stood there, a lifetime of choices swirling in his head. The weight of his past felt heavier than the gun on his hip. He looked at Leona, a silent promise forming in his heart. It was time to stop running. It was time to face the darkness he had so carefully ignored. This was his chance to redeem himself, not just for his family, but for the man he used to be, the man he had buried under layers of fear and compromise. This was his chance to earn the badge he wore. The town could burn, the world could turn on him. But he would not turn his back on this one last chance to be a good man. He had always found a way to justify his choices. He'd built a wall of rationalizations, a fortress of fear, to protect his family. But Leona's eyes were like a battering ram, and they had knocked the first stone loose. He walked past her, his hand on the smooth, worn wood of his gun handle. It was time. He was no longer a corrupt sheriff. He was a father and a husband who had made a mistake, and he was going to fix it. He was going to put things right. The moon was a sliver of bone in a sky the color of a bruise. Elias sat in his office, the lantern casting a long shadow that danced with the dust motes in the air. His rifle, a well-cared-for Winchester, rested across his knees. He'd spent the last few hours poring over old mining maps, the ones Silas had given him, the ones that were missing key tunnels, missing the parts that were now graves. Leona's brother was likely down there, a ghost in the dark. He had a choice to make, a clear and terrible one. He could continue to play the part of the corrupt sheriff, and Leona would leave, her grief a quiet footnote in the town's history. Or he could stand up, and he would put a target on his back and the back of his family. The thought of Clara and Ilara in danger was a poison in his blood. He saw Ilara sketching on the porch, her small face so full of life and light. He saw Clara, her hands busy, her face lined with the grief that had never truly healed. He had brought them here for safety, but in doing so he had placed them in the jaws of a lion. He heard the creak of the door. Clara stood in the doorway, a lamp in her hand. Her face, in the warm glow, was a study in soft concern. She didn't need words to know what he was thinking. She saw the maps on the desk, the rifle on his lap. She saw the haunted look in his eyes. "Elias," she said, her voice a quiet, firm thing. "What are you doing?" He didn't look at her. Couldn't. He stared at the maps, the lines and figures blurring. "A girl came to me today," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Looking for her brother." "And?" she asked. He finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Silas," he said. The name was a weight, a curse. "He's been collapsing the mines." Clara's face, usually so calm, was etched with a new emotion, fear. Not for herself, but for him. For what he was about to do. "You can't," she said. "He'll come for us." He looked away, his jaw tight. "I have to. I can't live with this. Not anymore." "And what about us?" she asked, her voice breaking. "What about Ilara? You're willing to risk everything, after all we've been through?" He had no answer. She was right. He had promised them a life of peace. A life without fear. But a life built on a lie was no life at all. The memory of his son, a small face lost to time, was a fresh wound. He had failed him. He would not fail them. "I can't live like this," he said, the words a raw confession. "I can't look at myself in the mirror. I can't look at you, at Ilara, and not feel the shame of what I've done." Clara took a step closer, her hand reaching out to touch his. "We've survived worse," she said, her voice a soft caress. "We'll survive this too." She was not asking him to stop. She was telling him she would be with him no matter what. She had always been the stronger one, the one who held the family together. He looked at her, at the quiet resolve in her eyes, and a wave of emotion, of reverence washed over him. This was the woman he had promised to protect, and he had failed her in every way but the most important. He had kept them alive, but at what cost? He stood up, his rifle in hand. He would do this. He would see it through. The next day, Elias walked into Silas's saloon, the light from the dusty windows a harsh and unforgiving thing. The place was full of Silas's men, their faces a gallery of cruelty and moral decay. Silas sat at a table in the back, a cigar in his hand, a smirk on his face. He saw Elias, the rifle, and his eyes narrowed. "Well, Sheriff," he said, his voice a low drawl, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" "There's a girl in town," Elias said, his voice calm, clear. "Looking for her brother." Silas chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Minors go missing all the time, Elias. You know that. It's the price of doing business." "Not anymore," Elias said. "The tunnels you collapsed. They're graves. I want you to tell her." Silas's smirk vanished. The air in the room went cold, a thick, palpable silence settling over the men. "You're a fool, Elias," Silas said, his voice a whisper. "You think you can just walk away?" "I'm not walking away," Elias said. "I'm doing my job." Silas stood up, his hand hovering over the gun at his side. "You're not doing anything," he said, his voice a low hiss. "You're a puppet, Elias, and you've just cut your own strings." Elias raised his rifle, the metal cold and heavy in his hands. "Try me." Silas's men stirred. Elias stood his ground, his eyes fixed on Silas. He was not afraid. Not for himself. He was afraid for Clara and Elera, but he had to do this. He had to face the monster he had helped create. A long, tense moment passed, the kind of moment that stretched out and felt like an eternity. Finally, Silas smiled. A cold, cruel smile. "Fine," he said. "You want to be a hero? Be a hero. But don't forget, heroes have families, and they're so much easier to break." He walked away, his men following him. Elias was left alone in the silent, oppressive heat of the saloon. He had done it. He had stood up. But at what cost? He had traded one kind of fear for another. The kind that came for your family. The town was a ghost now, the streets emptied, the windows shuttered. Silas's men had retreated, but their presence was felt everywhere, a silent, predatory menace that hung in the air. Elias's office was his fortress. The doors barred, the windows boarded up. He sat with his family, the lantern casting a weak light, the silence in the room, a heavy, tangible thing. Elera sat on the floor, her sketching book open, but her hand was still. She was just a child, and she was trapped in a war she didn't understand. Clara sat beside him, her hand holding his, her grip tight. They had chosen this, chosen to stand with him, and now they were paying the price. He was filled with a terrible, consuming guilt. He had done the right thing, but he had put the two people he loved most in the world in harm's way. He had traded his own soul for their safety, and now that bargain was coming due. He saw the fear in Elera's eyes, the quiet terror. He saw the resolute strength in Clara's face, the unshakable faith. But he also saw the grief, the years of unspoken loss, the weight of their lives, their past, and their future. A sharp knock at the door broke the silence. Elias's hand went to his gun. "Elias!" a voice called out. It was Leona. "They're at the general store." Elias and Clara exchanged a look. The general store. Their home. Silas was coming for them, just as he said he would. He was not a man of idle threats. "Stay here," Elias said to Clara. He couldn't bring himself to look at Elera. "I'm coming with you," Clara said, her voice firm. "I won't leave you." "Mama!" "No," Elera said, her voice a small, terrified whisper. Clara knelt down, her hands on Elera's shoulders. "Your father is doing the right thing, my love." "Sometimes, the right thing is the hardest thing." She kissed her daughter's forehead. "Stay here. Bar the door. We'll be back." They left the office, the night air cold on their faces. They moved like ghosts through the town, the only sound the crunch of their boots on the gravel. When they reached the general store, the place was dark, the windows broken, the door hanging off its hinges. Silas's men had gone through it like a plague, destroying everything, the sacks of flour torn open, the shelves overturned, the goods scattered across the floor like the debris of a storm. Silas was inside, standing in the middle of the wreckage, a lantern in his hand. His face, in the warm glow, was a mask of cold fury. He was holding something in his hand, the photograph, the one of their son. "Such a shame," Silas said, his voice a low taunt. "All that effort to protect what's left of your family, and I'll take it all from you." Elias's blood ran cold. He had to stop him, He had to get that photograph back. It was more than a piece of paper. It was their son, their grief, their love. It was all that was left of him. "Give it back," Elias said, his voice a low growl. Silas laughed, a high, cruel sound. "Or what, Elias? You'll shoot me? You'll start a war you can't win?" He walked over to a shelf, the photograph still in his hand. He placed it on a kerosene lamp, the flame a small, cruel thing, licking at the edges of the faded paper. Clara screamed. Elias raised his rifle. He had to make a choice, a terrible choice. He could shoot Silas and get the photograph back, but he knew Silas's men were out there, watching, waiting. Or he could let the photograph burn and try to get his family to safety. He looked at Clara, at the raw grief on her face. He saw the unhealed wound of their loss. He had to do this. He had to retrieve it. He aimed his rifle at Silas. "Drop it," he said. Silas smiled, a slow, triumphant thing. "You're a sentimental fool, Elias, and it's going to get you killed." Elias fired. The sound a deafening thing in the small space. The shot hit the lamp, shattering the glass, the flame dying. The room was plunged into darkness. Silas cried out, a sound of surprise and pain, as the shattering glass hit his hand. Elias moved in the dark, his senses heightened, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt for the photograph, his hand brushing against the crumpled paper. He grabbed it, his fingers closing around the precious artifact. A shot rang out, and he felt a sharp, searing pain in his shoulder. He fell to the floor, his rifle clattering beside him. He heard Clara's scream, felt her hands on him, pulling him up. He heard the sound of footsteps, Silas's men running toward them. "Run!" he yelled. "Clara, run!" He couldn't see her, couldn't see anything. He heard a click, the sound of a gun being cocked. He knew it was over. He had done the right thing, and it had cost him everything. He had traded his soul for his family, and now he had lost his life for a piece of paper. But he had to make sure they were safe. He saw the flicker of a match. Silas's face, in the brief glow, was a study in pure rage. He held a gun in his hand, and he was aiming it at Clara. Elias, with a pain-filled gasp, lunged forward, throwing his body in front of hers. A shot rang out, and he felt another, more terrible, more final, pain in his chest. He fell to the floor, the photograph still clutched in his hand. He heard Clara's scream, the sound of her falling to her knees beside him. "Elias!" she cried out. He couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. He looked up at the ceiling, the dark, oppressive thing that had been his home. He saw the shadows dancing, a macabre ballet of death. He saw the face of his son, a small, smiling face, in his mind's eye. He had tried. He had done the right thing. He had redeemed himself. He heard the sound of more gunshots, the sound of a struggle. He heard Silas's men running away, their footsteps fading into the distance. The sounds of the town were slowly returning, the whispers of the wind, the creak of a door. He felt Clara's hands on his face, her tears falling on his cheek. "You saved me," she whispered. "You saved us." "I told you," he whispered, the words a raw, painful rasp. "The right thing is the hardest thing." He felt the photograph in his hand. It was safe. His son was safe. He had done it. He had protected his family. He had redeemed himself. He had paid the price. He felt a quiet peace, a sense of completion. He was no longer a corrupt sheriff. He was a father, a husband, a man who had found his way home. The world around him faded. The light in Clara's eyes, the last thing he saw. He was finally free. The sun rose, painting the sky in a soft, forgiving orange. A new day. A new beginning. The town was still. The people were still afraid. But something had shifted. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence, a quiet stillness. Clara and Elias stood on the porch of their office, the morning light on their faces. They were together. They were safe. A small, crumpled photograph was tucked in Clara's apron, a reminder of the man who had laid down his life for them, a man who had, in the end, done the right thing. Leona was gone, riding out of town at first light, a grim smile of acceptance on her face. She had found her answer, the truth she sought. It was a terrible truth, but it was a truth all the same. She had closure, and in a world of endless pain, that was a kind of redemption. The town, Redemption's Hollow, was a hollow place no longer. It was a place where a corrupt sheriff had chosen to be a good man, a place where a family had found a new kind of strength. It was a place of ghosts, a place of memory, a place where the sun rose on a new day and the wind, for the first time in a long time, whistled a hopeful tune. The badge lay on the floor of the office, glinting in the morning light. It was no longer a mark of shame. It was a symbol of a promise kept, a debt paid, and a life, however brief, redeemed. The story of Elias Thorne would be told in whispers, a quiet legend of a man who chose honor over survival, and in doing so, found a peace he could never have bought. If you enjoyed this incredible tale from the frontier, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories from the American West. Click on the video on the screen for another tale we think you will love.